This video is going to explore the issue of gender bias in media reporting. Does the media treat male deaths differently to female deaths? One thing I've noticed about the press is that when it comes to victimisation, they frequently highlight the female gender, but not the male gender. When the groups of deaths or kidnapping are males, the gender is typically only mentioned infrequently, if at all. Often it will be reported as people or students or children. If females, the female gender terms occur frequently. The reverse is also true. When reading about perpetration, males are typically identified by gendered terms, whereas female perpetrators typically have their gender concealed in more generic terms or mentioned infrequently. We could only guess whether gender identification or non-identification is intentional or not. However, the impact would be the same. If the press repeatedly emphasise the gender of female victims, but rarely mention the gender of male victims, it will help people be mindful of female victimisation as a social evil. Likewise, they are less likely to remember or be cognizant of male victimisation. As an example, this video will look at the reporting practices associated with online news in relation to the gender of the victims of Boko Haram. I'll select a sample of each main event. Have you heard about the kidnapping of Nigerian girls by the Boko Haram? This was a terrible incident that devastated families and motivated an international campaign to bring back our girls. Here are some pictures designed to rally support for the girls. But did you hear about the male victims of Boko Haram? Probably not. There were no male victims, right? Wrong. There have been no social campaigns for Boko Haram's male victims. This presentation may partly help explain why people are unaware and apathetic about them. Let's backtrack into time to discover what emphasis the press gives to what gender. Here we have the article about the kidnapped girls. It occurred in April 2014. Unsurprisingly, the identification of the victims as girls was mentioned in the selected news report 10 times. There were no mention of boys and no mention of the group being children either. Clearly, the emphasis in the article is on the gender of the victims. Generic language such as the term children was not used. On one level, this would seem appropriate. But does the press use this same standard consistently? That is, repeatedly highlight the gender of the victims, particularly if those victims are males. Let's go back to 2013. The first article from 29th September recounts an attack on a Nigerian agricultural college. Very few newspaper reports identify that only the male hostels were attacked and that the female hostel was spared. Mostly omit any mention of the gender, and none highlight the gendered nature of the attack with any significance. Our ABC's article mentioned 40 sleeping students shot while sleeping in dormitories without mentioning the gender of the dormitories. Of those killed, all were students. Now, what gender student would you find in male hostels? You guessed it, males. Yet none of the victims are identified as males, and only passing mention is that they targeted the male dormitories. The victims are called students, pupils, or bodies. Now, there is the possibility that there were females also who may have died. So while the news reports appear to be concealing the gender identities of the victims, we must give them the benefit of the doubt. Do you think the press would highlight a gender crime if the attackers had solely attacked the female hostel? My guess is that they would. Let's go to the next article. Now we go to the next event in February 2014. This article highlights on an incident whereby 59 boys are killed. Note that its title is gender neutral, unlike the kidnapping of the girls title. In all the articles of this atrocity, no articles mention the gender of the victims more than once. They are predominantly presented as pupils or children. This article failed to mention that the attackers ordered the girls to go home, thus intentionally sparing them from harm. Now we come to June 2014. In this report, up to 500 people were killed. All of them were males. Note the title and opening sentence highlight only the massacre, not the gender. That's up to 1,000 innocent males slaughtered, separated from the females and gunned down. Now look at how many times their gender is mentioned. From the entire article, only 3 sentences mention males as victims, with the majority of the time the victims are identified using gender-neutral language. By the way, can you remember this massacre? If so, can you remember that only males were massacred? If not, why do you think you can't remember this but can remember the schoolgirls' kidnapping? 1,000 males comprising of men, boys and baby males is less important to the press or international community than the kidnapping of 200 girls. Here is an article showing 97 boys and men were kidnapped in August 2014. This is half as many males kidnapped as females that were kidnapped in April. Was there even half the size of the international campaign to bring back our boys? There was not even a call for a campaign, let alone even a small campaign. Now to the reporting. Remember, 200 girls kidnapped and the word girls is mentioned 15 times. 97 males kidnapped and the words boys or men mentioned once. In fact, the word girls is also mentioned once in the article, yet they were not even the victims of the kidnapping. The article did, however, advertise other articles related to kidnapped boys, right? Wrong. It advertised 6 other articles focusing on the kidnapped girls. I've pasted the adverts on the page you are looking at. The abductions that shocked the world were shocking because they involved girls. When boys and men are abducted, these are merely a reminder for the shocking abduction of girls. The value of the lives of men and boys appear to be less important than the value of girls. Here we have an article that highlights the abduction of children which are made up of children from both genders. The word girls is mentioned 16 times. The word boys is mentioned once in the entire article. Children are also mentioned once. The article includes some photos. The first is of the kidnapped girls from Djibouti. The second 2 are photos from BringBackOurGirls rallies. The final shows a number of male soldiers being court-martialed for refusing to fight Boko Haram. The photos remind us that the victims are females and the perpetrators are males. Here is part of the article with the word boys underlined in grey and girls underlined in brown. Both genders were kidnapped. Note the gender that gets the repetition. Here is another kidnapping of women and girls. Remember when 97 boys and men were kidnapped, words used to identify the male victims were used twice. When women and girls are kidnapped, in this article, their gender is highlighted 8 times. When we look at the table, there are a number of things that stand out. On 16th of April, when solely girls were kidnapped, only females are named repeatedly in the article as victims. On 28th of October, when boys and girls are kidnapped, female victims are highlighted 16 times more than male victims, even though all male victims were also children. When men and boys are kidnapped or killed with no identified female victims, male gender language for victims is either not used, or when used is typically a fraction of the repetition that females receive. Male rights activists often highlight that women's lives are valued more than male lives. They are treated as a protected class, the women, while males are treated as a disposable class. Crimes against females have a repeated emphasis of the gender of the victim, while crimes against males are simply crimes against other humans. When looking at the kidnapping and murders where gender is mentioned, we can see that for the reported 599 males killed, the gender is mentioned 9 times. For 110 males kidnapped, their gender is mentioned twice. For the 235 females kidnapped, their gender is mentioned 34 times. In these gendered incidents, females had 1/3 the number of victims, yet their gender was highlighted 3 times more than the combined male victims. This means that the gender identification of victims is 10 times more frequent with females in comparison to males. To put it another way, one male gender term is used for every 66 males dead or 55 males kidnapped. For females, Their gender is highlighted for every 6 females kidnapped. So we know that males have had significant impact from Boko Haram also. Let's see what attention they gained. 3.7 million hits for girls and 640,000 hits for boys. The boys impacted by Boko Haram receive 15% of the Google results. You might be saying, but the girls' results are inflated by the Save Our Girls campaign. And this would be right, but please note the pattern of repeating gender terms for female victims is so pervasive throughout the press, and international attention is more interested in rallying support to protect girls more so than saving boys. This selective attention discriminates against boys solely because of their gender that they were born into. They should be seen as no less deserving of support than girls simply because they were born with male genitals. The press reporting simply revealed the bias that exists in our community. Only the female gender matters. Only their safety is to be prioritised and protected. If you think I've been overly selective in my clippings, I ask you to check. Did you know about the massacre of 500,000 males, or only the kidnapping of 200 girls? If you knew of one but not the other, maybe I have a point. Please check the stories for yourself. If they reveal a pattern of gender reporting for females, and less so for males, please share this video. Thank you.